All right. So I'm going to do I'm going to do some kind of sort of low-tech thing, but it's a time saver. So, and I found it really interesting over the last couple of months. A little bit of report hacking, and mainly with Nessus type of data. So, why have I been messing with this? Basically because, you know, all of these tools have reports and all of them suck. Even the customized reporting is overly logoed, not parsable, any number of other things, and they're hard to analyze. So that's really what I run into and why I would want to parse out all this data. Plus, every one of my customers wants the report in their format with their statistics or their model of analyzing the data, or their cuts or slices at it. So that's really the why I started progressing down this format. Nessus has a couple of format structures. I'm sure most everybody in here has played a little bit with Nessus, but the two big ones and the ones that everybody's messed with over the longest period of time, MBE and now .nessus. MBE is a pipe delimited file if you're not aware of that, so you can pull it into Excel, you can parse it with awk, you can do any number of things with that file, and it's actually a pretty decent format. The reason I started this talk is actually I originally started this talk last month, and I was going to do a little bit of parsing with awk and various other things to juice data out of MBE files. But what happened is it looks like Nessus is kind of degrading the MBE format, and they're moving away from this flat file format. It's very difficult to get to it now, and when I say difficult to get to it, you have to take a Nessus version 2 file that somebody gives you, import it into a web console, and then after you get in the web console, you got to dump it back out as a version 1 file, and then you got to run a command line command, and you can get MBE again. So if you need MBE for some reason, because you have something written for it, you can get there, but it's a pain in the nuts to get to. The .nessus is an XML structure, so even though it's called .nessus, it's just an XML structure. The big thing about it is the data is actually segmented correctly in the .nessus files versus the MBE where you have this data blob at the end that doesn't have a common format. And the negative is it has really 3 different formats, it turns out. There's a .1 version, there's a version 2, and then if you convert something to XML at the command line in Nessus, it's yet another XML format. So if you write a parser for this stuff, it's 3 different parsers for 3 different data formats out of the same stinking tool. So yeah, exactly. This was driving me nuts last week because I have a lot of analysis for this kind of data to get it into reports. Obviously, most of you probably do as well. Doing things with XML is a little more challenging than doing things with a flat file. I'm going to talk about analyzing 3 different scan types, and most of the people in this room are fairly aware of these different scan types, but then you're also aware that our customers have no idea that these are different things. Vulnerability scanning, one thing. Compliance scanning, where you're comparing or looking at settings in a baseline. And I include validation of scanning and validating the scan results in here. And that's a big thing where you'll get somebody that hands you some scans and says, we had this vulnerability and we want you to tell us that we don't have this vulnerability anymore. So I did a little bit of work on what it takes to prove that and a parser to basically guarantee that your evidence supports your conclusion. So there's a little bit of work done in that aspect. So the first thing I'm going to start with is what I was going to talk about in November, which is MBE format and what I now call a legacy approach to parsing this data. The reason I'm calling MBE legacy is because, like I say, they're degrading the format. It's hard to get to.
If you use the legacy client,
yeah,
you just click a button and it spits out the MBE.
You'd think that, but that's only if you have legacy data that you're working with. If you install the legacy client, you'll get the GUI in your install, but unless you're opening a legacy file, the GUI won't actually process the current results from the scanner. At least what I've found. I've been able to open older files and still just hit export and get MBE from the client, but the current version of the web client, the new GUI won't pull in those results after 4.4.
I got the latest commercial version and
okay.
it spits out MBE files.
It'll still spit out. Okay, so I know there was a period of time there, and maybe I did enough complaining or some additional people did enough complaining online to Paul and Ron that get MBE back. I don't know. Yeah, the new web interface is the way they're going. The GUI is gone as far as they're concerned. They don't have a lot of reason to want to create a custom compiled version, is what I've been told directly from Ron and the Nessus reps. that they don't want to support, continuing to work on the GUI. They want to do one, web-based front end built right into the server. So I think as time goes on, I think you're going to be forced this direction. So anyway, you can definitely get there from the command line when you get into this position. And I kind of got crammed into this position last month when I'm doing like 4 or 5 different assessments. I got all these results coming in and reports to write, and all of a sudden all my tools weren't working because the format issues in one of those versions. The command line for this is right here. At the command line, you can actually go input file, output file, and get quite a few of the formats. You can get the HTML report, a .nessus, and then you can actually input a little more detailed stuff as far as which report you want. So if you conducted multiple scans from the same setup and you got different results or different boxes, you can key in on one versus the other from the command line. This might be valuable if you're still using MBE. So I do a little bit of command line work with the MBE. This is the old stuff that I work with as far as when I'm on an assessment. Most people need to know what targets they scanned. There's a quick way to kind of juice that out of the results. The other thing is, sometimes if you scan a whole segment, then you get false positives based on firewalls or IDS boxes that are responding yes to everything and all that kind of stuff. If you turn on this plugin, 10180, and it's not actually a plugin, it's a setting in there that says log live hosts, then you'll actually get more accurate results as far as the actual live targets that you scanned. So I find that that's pretty helpful, especially when you're dealing with devices that aren't particularly vulnerable. So say switches and printers and junk like that, that log live host is pretty helpful. I run into a lot of networks where they want me to prove coverage. So they want 95% or better of their enterprise scanned when they do a scan, or they want every item in their inventory scanned. And they'll look at the results and they'll say, you didn't scan any of the switches, or you missed all the printers, or these things that aren't vulnerable. So I find that's a pretty important setting. When you get into compliance scanning, as far as like trying to see if your boxes are FDCC compliant or they have CIS benchmark, this turns out to be a fairly handy command. You can run a Nessus scan for OS identification, and then this little command will pull out a count of every single OS. So it'll give you, X number of Windows XP boxes, X number of Windows 2000, X number of Linux. It'll give you a count of every single OS that it found and how many of them. So you can do some kind of sampling on your data sets or whatever, or which audit file to plug in towards those boxes. And the next one will give you the targets associated with each operating system. So if you want to break out as far as like, I need to know the host target index for all the XP boxes, you can grab them from this because it'll convert all those targets into a CSV. Most of these are pretty kludgy commands. This one I find pretty helpful too, and this little grep command will do a compare against an inventory to tell you if your scan found extra boxes that aren't listed in their inventory, or which boxes you missed in the inventory based on which way you flip those files. So if you're trying to get a compare there. And then the very last one, if you've done any kind of statistical analysis or roll-ups of MBE files into reports, it's really hard to unique that data because of the blob at the end that has basically the synopsis, the description, the solution, the CVE numbers, just all that stuff is lumped in there, and there's no common format for exactly which order and what ones appear in that blob. This little command will scrub the plugin output, which is basically what individualizes that blob. So if I scan 10 boxes and they all have different shares, that plugin output's going to give which shares were available on those boxes, but that also prevents you from uniquing that data. So it's a quick command to basically just scrap off that data so you can unique it. So that's my handful of quick command line tips. And I guess I should say why command line is important to me. It's because I want access to the data right away, and it's pretty disposable data to me. I just want to be able to look at it, analyze it, and move forward with that information. I'm not trying to print out a big report and present it to management and all these other kind of things when I'm in that kind of testing or analysis mode. So the command line turns out to be much, much quicker than utilizing the interface. Getting into more complicated stuff, I did a little bit of work with the XML at this point. Before I started this, I understand what XML is, hadn't really messed with XML. I know a little bit of Java. I'm not really a programmer. So this is a perspective of how somebody who's not a programmer and doesn't really do this as a regular basis approaches this kind of stuff. So take it for what it's worth, and if you have a better idea, I'm all ears, because the way I learned XML was to basically download everybody's course off of iTunes U, and I took the MIT course over Saturday and the course from Arizona on Sunday, and a couple of other courses, and learn the data. So for what it's worth, that's how I got to it. So what this first file does, this XML table command that I wrote, and I'll have links for all this source code at the end, but basically what XML table does is give you back what you would really want out of MBE from a .nessus file. You can run this one-line command with the XML table that I've created, and basically it's going to create an Excel-based spreadsheet. Let me see if I can find kind of what it looks like here. Boy, resolution's pretty brutal on this, but you can kind of get the idea of, wow, that's not helpful. Where's Keynote? Anyway, it's going to give you an Excel-based spreadsheet of all of the important data that I found within the MB or the .nessus format, which that turned out to be the plugin ID, so I have some unique thing to index on, what the risk factor is. I've been keying on the CVSS score, and for better or for worse, what it gives me is an actual tangible number to do some type of statistical analysis on, and that's one of my future projects, is to kind of explore what I can do with CVSS as far as, we always go to a client and they say, well, what is the risk of my network? Am I high? Am I moderate? Am I low? What am I? I like to give something behind that. And what I think I can give behind that is by calculating the CVS scores, I think I can give some statistical analysis as to, is the network moderate based on some reasoning? And that reasoning, I don't know what it's going to be yet. It gives a synopsis, detail, solution, the important stuff for fixing it. But then there's a couple other interesting fields that were not in the MBE file that are in this .nessus file, and that's the plugin publish date. So you can see how old the vulnerability is. So you can actually go, you have a high or a critical, and this critical's 3 years old, or this critical's 6 months old, or these were last week's, patch Tuesday patches, or whatever. You can determine them from that plugin publish date. Also, the exploitees field, Nessus is actually including whether there's published exploits for that code or if there's no published exploits for that code. So you can actually lump them that way as well. You can say, here's all your criticals that have published exploits versus, and they're new or old or whatnot. And then a host list, which I find the big thing about this is everybody has to do that one table in their report that has all the vulnerabilities and what IPs are associated with the vulnerabilities. And because of the way Nessus does their structure of XML, where the vulnerabilities are a subtree of the host, it makes it rather difficult to roll them up in the opposite, where basically you're rolling up unique vulnerabilities with all the IPs associated with it. You got to loop through the tree quite a bit. So this gives you, unique to vulnerabilities with all the hosts associated with it. So it gives you that, a 1 second command that's going to give you the report, that the table that's in every report, basically.
Does your tool basically, or parser, so let's say you have like multiple IPs that have the same problem.
Yeah.
And you combine all those IPs together and all the problems together?
That's exactly what it does. It uniques on the problem or the plugin ID, gives you one line per problem, and it'll have a single cell that has, these 10 hosts have this patch missing.
Looking at 10,000 vulnerabilities.
Exactly.
It's really irritating trying to go through all that.
One other thing I didn't mention, it also does something that Nessus's client doesn't do, and it'll merge multiple scan files, because we all know that we don't get a perfect scan of every single host the first time. So what you end up with is 20 trees of XML data or 30 trees of, or a folder of XML data at the end, and you need one report table. You can point this thing in a folder and it'll create one unique report table from all those scan results. And there is no combined feature in Nessus currently for a set of scans. So I find it really helpful for that. The next one I created was for compliance data. This one I think is probably one of the, this is probably the most fun one that I built, at least I thought, or I was most interested in. What this one will do is it'll specifically go find the 2 plugins associated with compliance data for Unix and Windows out of your Nessus scans, and it creates an XY grid of that data, which you can kind of, it's a little blurry, but you can kind of get the idea from the picture down below. What it's going to give you is every single item that that compliance file scanned for, or those compliance files scanned for, because it'll combine them all. It'll give you all the hosts that you scanned across the top, and then it'll give you color-coded results associated with, whether that host passed or failed. the benefit of that is you can quickly at a glance find outliers in this. You can find, the admin guy's box where he's never patched his box, but he's treating the entire environment one way. You'll see a whole column of red fails and everybody else is passed. Or you can quickly find things that they're not controlling, like if they do auto running consistently because it's not part of group policy. You'll see some machines that passed and some that failed, and you'll get this patternized result set really, really quickly, and it supports HTML out as well as Excel out. One interesting thing that I found out from a programming perspective was that Excel supports HTML tables. So if you write any script to basically write an HTML-based table, color coding and the whole works, and you just give it an Excel extension, it'll open in Excel just right. So it's a quick way to get it into that format, and if you want to save it as CSV or whatever you want to do, you can go from there. But this is pretty interesting to get a quick glance at an environment. If you want to scan 1,000 boxes or 100 boxes to see if they're FDCC compliant, there you go. You get your gridded output, and you can quickly analyze what they're actually doing and not doing with this tool. The last script that I created is the validation script that I was talking about. I kind of broke down. One thing I do in my job is I get a lot of results from a lot of people in the field. We have a lot of hosts, and we have open POAM items, these plan of action items that, we found this plugin ID 6 months ago, and so said he fixed it, and he rescanned, and here's his file, or whatever, that kind of thing. Or, the admins swear that they fixed this, go do a rescan and give me some evidence. So what I was trying to automate was, there's a lot of, in big environments, when I'm dealing with 15,000 hosts or 10,000 hosts or something like that in these big environments, it takes a little bit of effort to analyze these kind of things unless you do a custom scan for one plugin or something like that. And you want to make sure that the guy set the scanner up right. So I broke it down into a couple of things. First, did they even scan for the plugin ID that they were trying to validate? The second thing was, was it found on any of the hosts that they scanned? And then after that, what host did they scan to see if they scanned the one that they said they fixed? So what this validation thing will do is you can run a single command, you can throw an input file at it, you can throw as many plugin IDs as you want to validate associated with it, and what you get is some output that looks like this. So basically it'll go through, it'll say, I located the plugin ID, it was, X number in the set scanned for, it was identified on X number of hosts, or it was not identified at all, and then here's the set of hosts you scanned. So a one-line command that'll completely validate, that your artifact is indeed proving what you tried to set out to prove. Or, if you're the guy that has to check to make sure they did it right, one command and you can go, yep, they checked it, they did this, they did that, and it does all the factors that you need to look for. The next things that I'm looking at, porting this stuff to, by the way, this stuff's all written in Java because, well, for a number of reasons. I use multi-platforms, so Java's fairly helpful there, and I'm not a programmer, and Java's about all I know how to program in even adequately, so that's how it landed in Java. But I'm looking at doing some statistical analysis with CVSS scores, and I'm also going to, I think, tweak these scripts to where they actually complete the actual NIST output tables that give you room to do impact associated with the vulnerability and all that kind of stuff, so I can cut and paste it over into the reports that I work with and maybe some of you all work with. I'm looking at tweaking the compliance parser, or a version of the compliance parser that actually combines those results with a NIST 853 framework. So instead of just outputting every single thing I tested for with every single host, it'll actually go down the list and go, okay, AC2 is account management. Here's all the factors for account management, and they passed AC2 based on the results, or they didn't pass AC2. So I can have, yeah, because I'm sick of analyzing this stuff manually and then trying to articulate if somebody passed a control or didn't pass a control, and I have to go through all the different iterations of which boxes passed and not, and have to write a note up on each one, and it's kind of a pain, and it's labor intensive.
It's called it's a commercial scanner.
There's quite a few of them, but what you'll find is that every single one of them you're going to have to tweak for sure, to make sure that you're testing for the right thresholds. So if you want, 8-character passwords or 12-character passwords or whatever your SSP says, what you're supposed to be checking for, you have to tweak that scanner to look for that. If you need to know if there's a virus scanner, not a single one of those is going to test for every single virus scanner on the planet and say, yes, you have a virus scanner. It's going to wait for you to tell it what one to look for and what file path and all that kind of stuff.
You have to one time at least do it.
Yeah.
One time.
Once you do that,
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
churn out the report. This will churn out, I find that my customer is a little bit, in depth on this stuff where they want you to sample 10% of their boxes in their environment or 25% of their boxes and them to be randomly selected and then the results from each and every one of them. So if I say you don't have a banner on a box, they can look and go, okay, well, I tested these 25% and they were randomly selected and these 3 didn't have a banner. And here's all the evidence to prove that. So, this just automates that into one command. So, but yeah, there's a ton of people that make SCAP compatible products that, output this kind of data. Again, I just find the output from all these tools, overly labeled with the company that created them and not useful because it seems like the federal customers want it in their format. So if you go to DoD or NIST or any of these places, they're going to hand you and say, this is our risk assessment template. Complete that with the end of your risk assessment. So you're going to have to get it into that. These things will just take it into Excel or flat files so you can actually work with the data. The more complex one that I think I want to do is some kind of aspect. I think it was last month that there was a chart associated with vulnerabilities in an enterprise over months to see when things, went away and then they came back. I want to do something like that, only a little more complex, where it gives you the entire enterprise, but then it gives you each host so you can see if a vulnerability came back or was available on a host in what months and all that kind of thing. And I'm still looking for some other stuff, but there's quite a bit you can do with this data. I'm going to throw the slides out, so I went ahead and included the links to the Java source, but they're all out on blackhat.org, which is my domain.
Did Black Hat ever try to contact you?
No, but I get a lot of Jeff Moss's email. I really, and I forward it to him, and I've offered to put a forward in for him, but he doesn't seem to respond very often. So there's a few customers that, when they don't get money and things, they send an email to me somehow. So it's
On
humorous.
the compliance checking,
Yeah.
have you thought about taking a previous scan and the current scan and producing the difference as a report?
I have looked into that, actually doing diff over time, and you can actually do a compare in the web console currently between 2 scans. So I've looked into that, but some of the functionality is there. One thing I did look at doing with the compliance scan, which I found kind of interesting, it was kind of on the theme of like a What's Up Gold or something like that, that if you automated a Nessus scan to say scan every 30 minutes or every hour, and then the next step was to churn it through that little bit of Java, you'd essentially have a web console that had active compliance. So it would show you if somebody monkeyed with their machine because it would go from green to red, on pass or fail. So if somebody changed their password policy or removed the banner or installed some software or something like that, the thresholds would actually change. So you could get some active monitoring in your environment just with a simple like 2-line cron type of thing from the scanner. So I found that automation might be kind of an interesting approach too, depending on if you needed in your environment for NIST requirements currently, monitoring is for low, but once you get into like moderate and high, you have to actively apply a baseline. This wouldn't apply it, but this will give you that monitoring capability if you were so inclined to run a scan that often for compliance. The compliance scans run really fast, I find. You can do, I think I did 9,000 hosts in about 15 minutes the other day, so I'm pretty impressed with how fast those plugins will fire. What's that?
Those were authenticated?
Yeah, it's authenticated registry read basically. So, yeah, or a SSHN in a Unix environment. I threw a little request in here. If one of you guys knows somebody that's interested in this kind of risk stuff, that's a mathematician or some kind of statistics guru or something, one thing I've been wanting to do research-wise is to adapt formulas and statistical theories from other lines of work, like the medical community and things like that, into security risk analysis. I find that we don't have good metrics for things. One of the puzzles I've been working is if you spend, say $50,000 on the latest, greatest, security product, how do you prove that the $50,000 actually did something for you? Basically measuring non-event. So you have a website, nothing happens to it, but you spent $50K on this web program. Did the web program save you something, or did it not save you anything at all and nothing really happened? So some way to do statistics on basically non-event. I think that can be adapted from like drug trials where they do placebo effect versus the actual effect of a medication and some of the formulas they use in those kind of industries, but I'm not quite sure. But anyway, if somebody's into that kind of thing, I'm looking at, it's a topic of interest, I guess I should say. Yeah, there's a little bit better look at, kind of how that parser works. But that's it. Anybody have any questions for me? As far as, go for it.
Have you thought about plugging all this data into a SQL database and then connecting it to a report engine?
I have.
Outputting like fancy reports and like crystal reports.
Great question.
Yeah, there's.
Because I'm lazy.
I usually deal with a lot with disposable data. In that disposable data, me being an auditor, I go in, I look at data, I write something, and then that's the end of that data as far as I'm concerned. The customer lives with that data a lot longer than I live with that data. There is an open source project out there, and I'm not sure if it's still active, called NProtect. NProtect for a long time back on the Nessus 2 engine did exactly that. It would pull it into SQL and let you turn out PDFs and all kinds of reports in an open source format. I don't know if it's still an active project, but it's definitely something you should be doing from an administration perspective, is looking at things over time. It's basically replicating their more expensive console product at Nessus.